Well, it's like millions of people are driving down the road, but doesn't the genius of Henry Ford or Steve Jobs or Thomas Edison, doesn't that count for anything? Oh no, the road built that. How insulting can you be? Then you've got Hillary Clinton this week, and what does she say? Businesses don't create jobs. How many people here don't work for a business? That's the most ridiculous thing on the planet that should live on. I don't understand how there could be anyone who hasn't decided. There is a different vision between the parties. We believe that the private marketplace, free exchange, voluntary exchange, that's what kids are. But of all the things that's happened under the president, I say it's sort of like old McDonald's farm of scandals. Here a scandal, there a scandal, everywhere a scandal. But probably the one that bothers me the most is Benghazi.
Right.
There's been a lot of discussion about the talking points, whether it's about a video, whether we could have gotten reinforcements there that night. All those are important things. But I think what's more important than that is that for 6, maybe 9 months in advance of Benghazi, Hillary Clinton was asked for reinforcements. She was asked for more security. This isn't one request. This is dozens of requests denied. Starting in February or March of that year, before the ambassadors killed in September, starting in the early spring, there were 3 groups of 6-person special forces teams. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that's what they've got. They have three groups of 6 guys. 2 of them were let go. Why? Because of this concept of political correctness. She didn't want the Libyans to think that we were carrying guns. She didn't want to think we had uniformed people there. She didn't want them to feel like Americans were lording over there with military might. It was the middle of a civil war. The war's still not over there, and she put our diplomats at risk without any guns. So they keep pulling people back. In April of that year, the ambassador requested an airplane. DC-3 wants to be able to get around the country or leave in an emergency. Denied. 3 days after they deny the plane, Hillary Clinton's State Department denies the plane. 3 days later, they approve an electrical charging station for $100,000 for the Vienna embassy. They're greening up the Vienna embassy, and they have electric cars that they want to charge up there. It's one thing after another. That summer, the State Department, and this is the same thing they do on Ebola right now. They say, "No, enough money." It's untrue. But the State Department said, Republicans didn't give us enough money. Hogwash. They had plenty of money. Ask them what they spent the money on. Ask them what they spent the infectious disease dollars on. 1% of the budget's gone towards Ebola. $40 billion in the last 10 years. They chose not to spend it on Ebola. But when you talk about Benghazi, you've got all this money. You know what they spent $650,000 on that summer before the ambassadors assassinated? Facebook ads. Seems that Hillary wanted more Facebook friends on her State Department Facebook. $650,000. They spent $700,000 sprucing up and landscaping at the Brussels embassy. They spent $5 million on crystal glassware and barware for the State Department. All of that, meanwhile, request denied for security in Benghazi. You get to August, a month before the attack, the ambassador sends cable after cable. They requested a 16-person, the last remaining security force, a 16-man team led by Colonel Wood. They requested that force stay in Benghazi. Request denied. A month before. And so when Hillary Clinton came before the committee, I'm on that committee. She came before the committee. I asked her the first question. I said, Secretary Clinton, did you read the cables from the ambassador? And she acted kind of put off, like, I read the cables? Well, maybe because it's one of the most dangerous countries on earth, and because I don't think the secretary may read a cable from every country on the planet. But you know what? From one of the 5 most dangerous requesting security help, it's inexcusable, and all of this added together should preclude Hillary Clinton from ever being asked. Here's the rest of the story, too. It wasn't just about protecting the embassy or Benghazi. It's about when we get involved militarily, we need to think before we act. The war wasn't entered into constitutionally. The Constitution says that you, through your representatives, get to vote on the initiation of war. Declaration of war is in Congress. It is not the unilateral prerogative of the president. But he went anyway. He went into Libya on his own with no approval, unconstitutionally. But the other thing is we wound up with unintended consequences. If you ask yourself objectively, are you safer now or before the Libyan war? Are we more at risk from jihadists now or before the war? Gaddafi was a terrible but secular dictator who kept radical Islam at bay. The radical Islamists in Libya now swim in our swimming pool. Our entire embassy is gone. There are dozens of jihadist groups roaming the countryside. It's an utter disaster, and it was a mistake to get in there in the first place. But if we do things appropriately, if we come to you through your representatives and have a full-throated debate, maybe we don't get involved in a war that in the end makes things worse. I've said the same thing about the Syrian war. War, 600 tons of weapons have been dumped into it over the last 3 years. 600 tons of weapons. A year ago, the president wanted to bomb Assad for him using chemical weapons on his own people. A terrible and horrific genocide. But the president said, we need to bomb Assad. And I said, well, what happens if we bomb Assad to the 2 million Christians who live there? I got no good answer. 2 million Christians live in Syria. They're not big fans of ISIS, all right? So you got Assad on one side, you got ISIS on the other side. Had we bombed Assad, do you know where ISIS would be now? ISIS would be in Damascus, controlling all of Syria. We need to think before we act. ISIS is stronger now, and a threat. We do have to do something about it. I will, if we ever get the chance, vote to use force against ISIS. Understanding that ISIS is stronger, bigger, and more of a threat to us because we provided a safe haven for them. I still don't have an answer for the Christians who live in Syria. During the Iraq War, 250,000 Christians fled Iraq to Syria. 2 million Christians live there. There's a little town in Syria called Malula, and there was a young man there by the name of Zarkis el-Zaka. And as ISIS or some of their allies came into town, they said to Zarkis el-Zaka, a young 19-year-old Christian in Syria, they said, recant your Christianity or die. Zarkis el-Zaka looked at them in the eye and he said, I'm a Christian. And if I must die, I do it. I won't recant. And those were his last words. It's a complicated, messy situation over there. We will at times have to be involved. But I pray that we will think about what we're doing before we do it, and that we will try to defend our interests, and that we will try to prevent more radical Islam from rising, but know that civil war, getting on the wrong side of the civil war, sometimes leads to making radical Islam worse. And I hope that we will think this through, because I'm very concerned about where it's going over there. Finally, I would say, if we want to grow our party, if we want to be able to win, you want to win Michigan, you want to win Michigan big, you need votes in Detroit. I was in Detroit today at your office today. The Republican National Committee has an office in Detroit, and we pledged to keep it, and I think it's a great step forward. There are three things I talk about when I come to Detroit or Atlanta or any big city that has big city problems of poverty and unemployment. I say, look, Republicans care. We want to help people in poverty. We want to help people who are unemployed. We just have different ideas about how to do it. So I have a bill called Economic Freedom Zones. And this bill would dramatically lower the taxes in areas of high unemployment, in areas of high poverty. For Detroit alone, it would be a $1.3 billion tax cut over 10 years. It would stimulate the economy. Different than a government stimulus. The problem with the government stimulus is the president had $1 trillion stimulus, or $800 billion stimulus. Well, what he did is he taxed you, took your money, then he decided who to give it to. The business doesn't work that way. Anybody's ever looked at small businesses, at least half of them fail. So if I'm taking money and giving it to somebody, half the time I'll give it to the wrong person. If I lower taxes by $1 billion in Detroit, who's going to get the money? People who are already in business are paying taxes that you voted on. They're buying their stuff. They're popular in the economy. What's a purest form of democracy? It's called democratic capitalism. Businesses survive it. Make stuff that you like. Go to Detroit and say, we care, we want to help, we just have a different way of doing it than the Democrats do. And by the way, has what the Democrats offered you done anything for you? What have they done for you lately? And I think you look at Detroit and say, there are some good things that we're trying to get back on the ground, but there's a lot more that can be done, and Republicans can be part of that, and you'll begin also to win votes. So you're just trying to get votes. Yeah? I'm a politician. But it's the right thing to do. We need to talk about school choice. My kids went to public schools. I went to public schools. We went to great public schools.